I learned to read the road the way other kids learn their letters. My uncle taught me the cadence of an 18-wheeler, how the engine talks when a bearing's going, how the trailer hums when a load shifts. I grew up with grease under my fingernails and a thermos of coffee that never cooled. After 3 months of apprenticeship runs, the company let me take a light dry goods haul alone. It felt like a test I'd been waiting for my whole life, a chance to prove to my parents that I could be trusted, that I could make the decisions that come with being behind the wheel at night. I don't say I was cocky, just eager. The way you are at 18 when the map looks like promise instead of responsibility. It was December in Wyoming, and the wind had a habit of speaking in gusts that tore at the trailer's corners. Snow drifted, quick and ghost-like, collecting in the hollows of the highway. By 10, the radio sounded like static and the cab felt twice as wide and half as warm. Fuel light blinked. I pulled into Black Hollow because it was the only light for miles, because the map said so, because I didn't want to push on with what might be nothing more than paranoia. The market was empty, like the world had gone inside to avoid the cold. I was stretching when a man came up behind the pump's ragged coat, beard iced over, eyes like he'd been awake since yesterday and the day before. He pointed at the highway and spoke soft, like he was trying not to wake the sleeping lot. If you're taking the south exit, don't go the other way. Trust me, you don't want to meet what's down that road. I remember thinking then that his breath looked more like cloud than air. I laughed it off, nervous, because anyone who talks like that looks like they've seen the worst of something, but his eyes were steady, and something in his voice held a story that had cost him more than a warm coat. Son, that exit ain't lit for a reason. They cut the power on purpose. Then he was gone, back into the glow of the market like he'd never been there. I felt the warning stick to the back of my neck. I went back to the truck, with my toes cold, and scolded myself for being spooked. I had a route to make, miles to earn, and a schedule that didn't care about warnings or omens. I merged onto the highway and the world narrowed to headlights and white. A mile out, the streetlights blinked off like someone had walked by and switched them all. Black swallowed the shoulders and the trees. It was the kind of dark that feels loud in the ears. And then, like a bad dream folding into waking life, a pickup sat crosswise in the lane, its running lights off, blocking everything. I slowed. Figures stepped out of the snowbanks, moving with a practiced calm. One tapped a bat against his palm. Another had a machete resting on his shoulder like it was part of him. There were more, 10, 12, stepping from the drifted edges as if they'd been waiting on signal. My hands went cold on the wheel. This had the wrong shape to be random. It was a setup. I knew the feeling in my gut, calibration from stories swapped at truck stops and the instincts my uncle drilled into me about never being surprised on the road. I threw the rig into reverse, tires slinging salt and snow, backing away with the rear of the trailer swinging wide. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. They chased the truck for a few yards, fists and metal scraping the trailer skin. I spun a reckless U when the road opened and floored it toward the market lights, like the thought of warmth was a magnet. The ambulance blue lights on the dashboard blended into the market's neon. Back at Black Hollow, I called 911 with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The operator's voice was tight and kind, the promise of officers coming immediate and real. I waited in my cab with the heater on full, replaying the faces I'd seen, when the cold in my bones turned into suspicion. No squad car came, no callback. The night waited like a patient animal. The next day I went to the sheriff's office because that's what you do. Report it. Get it in the system. The deputy I spoke with was a broad-shouldered man with the world in his eyes. He did his best, took my statement, made the polite noises a man in uniform makes to reassure a shaken kid. 2 weeks later, when I asked why no patrol had found them, his voice dropped, and the smile left his face. That exit's been a problem a long time. They're gone when we get there. No trails. Almost like they know we're coming. Those words did something in me that rearranged the trucker superstition I'd grown up with. The man at the pump, maybe homeless, maybe a survivor of the ambush, had been right. I didn't sleep right for nights after. Every rumble of snow against the trailer sounded like footsteps. I started taking long detours at dusk, following maps like rituals. The job got heavier somehow. The rhythms that had soothed me suddenly seemed like thin protection against whatever waited in the cutoffs. Friends in the yard told stories. Some mentioned seeing rigs pulled from roads with doors open and no drivers. Empty cups on the dash, the heater still blowing. Colleagues who'd rode the same westbound runs nodded at certain mile markers, their eyes going somewhere behind me when they said, "Don't take the south exit." I thought about the man with the beard. Maybe he'd lost something out there, maybe family or pride. Maybe he'd been one of the ones who had been caught, escaped, and come back forever changed. That's how lives break down on the long haul. One bad pull, one bad stopping place, and you can be rearranged in ways the maps don't show. Weeks turned to months. The road never stopped being a place where the ordinary became unpredictable. I learned to listen harder. The radio was never just noise. It was a weather vane of people's moods. I watched other drivers' faces in diners, what they left in their cups, the way their hands tightened on a fork when they told certain stories. I learned which truck stops had light that stayed on all night, and which ones housed silence like a living thing. Once, I found a man in the overnight lot who was staring at his hands like they'd betrayed him. He'd taken that same south exit once, he told me, on a run like any other. He'd rolled past a parked car and thought nothing of it until shapes filled his mirrors and a truck of men lit up in his rear view. He swore they'd caught him if someone with a shotgun hadn't fired a flare into the air, scattering them like birds. He showed me the scar on his forearm, 2 shallow lines from where a bat had nicked him, and then he laughed, a quick, brittle sound. "You learn the rules," he said. "You learn who to listen to. Sometimes a ragged man at a pump is the only textbook you get." Years passed and I kept driving, older than I felt and maybe a little softer at the edges. I still avoid that stretch, and I tell rookies what the man at Black Hollow told me, not to scare them, just to make sure they know the road is not neutral. It will give you 1,000 kinds of kindness and a few kinds of cruelty. The south exit is a scar on the map, a place where darkness can be organized and patient. Once, passing Wyoming at night, I slowed near a turnout and watched the sky open like a black mouth. The trucker's life is a ledger of small choices. You choose where to stop, which strangers to trust, what stories to believe. When the wind is screaming and the lights die, you choose to keep your lights on and your wits sharper. I tell the story now to remember that my life is not merely on the other side of a schedule. It is also what I chose when the lights went out. The road teaches you that caution is a form of care of yourself and the people who'd be worse off if you ignored what you were given to know. Trust the warnings you get from those who've already seen the worst. Your life can depend on a little humility and the willingness to listen. I learned to hate winter the night the rig slid off the mountain and never stopped hating it afterward. That night took my cousin, my co-driver, and a piece of myself. The ice took the rest. For 3 winters after, I treated every white line as a threat, and every gust of wind as the memory of the trailer fishtailing beneath me. Still, life doesn't wait on grief. Bills pile, bosses call, and a man with a mortgage learns to put one foot back on the brake and the other on the gas. When the Salt Lake run came through musical gear, careful load, decent pay, I took it. The paycheck mattered. The road, even with its ghosts, was where I still earned my living. Echo Ridge shows up on my dashboard like a promise you don't want to make. I'd driven that pass 100 times, knew the switchbacks, the pullouts where snow chews at the shoulder and the fences that disappear under drifts. That night the storm had teeth. Winds licked my mirrors and the heater pushed hot, stale air into a cab that smelled of coffee and worn leather. The GPS, usually a steady hum of directions, froze and rebooted with something new. Exit 127, detour to Primary Road. I blinked at the screen and thought for a minute it was a construction reroute. I'm a man who trusts maps until they contradict what he knows with his bones. The sign itself looked fresh, edges catching my headlight. There were no cameras, no cones, just that gleaming slab, and a narrow ramp curling down into trees. I told myself to obey it because the traffic alerts were spitting warnings about closures ahead. I told myself I wanted to stay safe. If I'm being honest, part of me also wanted to be in motion. Motion is how you drown out the replay of a wreck in your head. The detour wound down like someone had unspooled a ribbon through the woods. Cab lights threw cones across telephone poles bowed under snow. Old cabins stared like missing teeth, their roofs white. The lane squeezed to one, then narrower, until I felt small and foolish in the 2 tons of steel I drove. The road wasn't on any freight atlas I'd used for years. It curved where it shouldn't and rose where my experience told me it would fall. At a crossroads that shouldn't exist, someone stood in the middle of the fork, a figure with a brown parka too big for him, hood drawn, face lost in shadow. My first reaction was the company rule, don't pick up hitches. My second was practical. Who the hell walks in that? The wind shoved a handful of snow at him, and he didn't move. He looked like a man who had been standing there a long time. "You shouldn't be here," he said when I lowered the window. His voice had a rasp I'd heard in cabins and hospitals, something worn by cold and time. Road circles back wrong. I can show you the way out. Part of me wanted to laugh the way you do to cover being scared. Instead, I asked the question the rule book forbids. Where you headed? He shrugged and pointed at a fork, then the other. Back to where I'm needed, he said. It was the kind of answer that clarified nothing. I let him in because I'm human, and because I wanted someone to be there with me on a night that felt like it was watching. He smelled faintly of antiseptic, and a campfire someone tried to keep alive. He spoke little, mostly pointing left or right at intersections, as if he had memorized the pattern of the road. He knew the hairpin where a plow often missed the drift, and the rail where the shoulder gave way. He knew it like a man who'd walked the route when the maps were still paper. 20 minutes into his quiet, we arrive at another intersection that, in my head, doesn't exist. It's a place I should be able to draw with my eyes closed, and it isn't on the GPS, isn't in the atlas, doesn't match the terrain. He told me to stop, opened the door, and climbed out into the storm like a man returning to a cairn. You'll be fine now, he said. Others won't be, unless I reach them. Then he turned and vanished into the white like someone pulling a sheet over a lamp. I sat there, hands on the wheel, waiting for the headlights to find the familiar road. When they did, I was back on Route 70 like I'd never left. My GPS showed no detour, no exit 127. My trip log had no record of the winding miles I'd just driven. It was as if the road had never existed, and my memory was the only proof it had. Months later, I still feel that small, cold tug when a blizzard rolls in. The other drivers on the CB started passing around similar stories, static ghosts about ways that open and close in storms, a man who appears in a parka to point the lost back to safety. They call him different names in different lots: the guide, the walker, the old-timer who knows the road's heart. Some swear they saw him leading a stranded family to a plowed lane. Others say he's a memory, a survival trick, a collective hallucination born in white danger. For me, the man became a measure of something I couldn't name. Was he real? A man like any other with a reason to be out there? Was he someone who died in a slide long ago and learned to keep the living from following? I don't have a tidy answer. The rational part of me catalogs possibilities: prank, person with local knowledge, or bad wiring in a head, while another part keeps a place for that night on a shelf the world can't find. The winter after, at a diner off I-15, an older driver slid a coffee across and said, "Keep to the primary lanes when it kicks up. If you see a man pointing, don't argue, just follow." He didn't grin. He had that look of a man who'd seen the road hand out mercy and menace in the same breath. The more people told the story, the less it was mine and the more it belonged to the pass itself, an oral map for the foolish and the tired. I avoid Echo Ridge now like some men avoid funerals. I run the longer route even when it costs me time and money. Once, in a protective moment of bravado, I slowed at the old turnoff and watched the drifted tree line. The lamplight of my cab painted the snow in familiar gold. But the crossroads where the man had stood held only silence and the slow, patient dark. It felt blessed and empty both. Driving taught me a lot. How to read a load, how to coax a tired engine, how to listen when the night speaks. It also taught me the importance of being honest. With fear, we don't leave the road because we're cowards. We leave because we value the life waiting at the other end of the route. The hitchhiker in the parka lives somewhere between those lessons. He's a story we tell at rest stops when the coffee is cheap and the heaters are loud. He's a nameless hand that steadies you when the world tilted once and you found yourself without a co-driver. Sometimes faith is practical. Sometimes it's a polite lie that keeps you making better choices when exhaustion presses like a thumb. I don't know if the man was a ghost in a story or a stranger with a lamp to light the way. What I know is this: on some roads, kindness is risky, and caution is charity. I didn't bring him to my house. I didn't ask for his number. I let him vanish. That choice saved a lot of questions I'd rather not have to answer. Respect the limits the road sets, listen to people who know its secrets, and remember that sometimes survival is found in the simplest act, following a quiet warning rather than arguing with the storm. I started driving nights because it paid the bills and because the kitchen at my parents' house never felt warm anymore. My sister's treatments didn't wait for daylight, and the restaurant owner liked hiring someone who could take odd runs and never complain. I was 27 when I learned how quickly the road can rearrange a person. Responsibility puts a weight in your chest that makes the dark feel heavier. I took the winter shifts because I had to, because the tips helped, and because being out on a lonely road at midnight made the bills seem a smaller thing than the quiet back home. That night in December, with snow sideways and the van's heater coughing like an old man, I told myself it was one last run. That's what I always said when I took a job I didn't want. One last run, and I'll be done. I said it that night as I signed for a stack of containers bound for an address in the Pinelands, and I said it again when my boss handed me the keys with a smile that made his breath show in the cold. By the time I found Timberwolf Road, the trees were swallowing the sky. The driveway was long enough to give the van a slow, hollow feeling as I rolled over the ruts, and the house sat back from the road like it didn't want to be seen. No porch light, no glow in the windows, just dark glass and a doorway that breathed out cold. I like to think I had a sixth sense that should have nudged me to leave, but hunger for a paycheck and the habit of being responsible narrowed my thinking to a button on the van and a piece of paper that said 47 Timberwolf. I parked under the single reflector and grabbed the bags. The snow sank under my boots. When I pressed the bell, I heard the echo swallowed by wood and wind. No answer. I knocked on the door, louder this time, and thought maybe I'd just catch someone asleep. The porch light stayed dark. Then the door cracked, and a beam of flashlight stabbed into my face so sharp I had to blink. The guy at the doorway was young, maybe my age, head tucked into an oversized jacket that made him look small. He held the beam steady like he was testing me. "Just put it inside," he said flatly. His voice went nowhere. It was like a line from an instruction manual. He'd left the door ajar enough for me to see the living room. Furniture under sheets, dust on the floor, an air of a place that had been abandoned halfway through. The light showed me more. A table with a ring where a cup had once sat. A lamp without a bulb. Corners white with settled neglect. It didn't look lived in. It looked staged to look as if no one lived there anymore. My gut did a small, hard flip. "Sir, I need a signature," I said, because that's what the job was. Document the drop, get paid, drive away. He stepped closer until his flashlight painted my chest. "Put the food inside." He repeated it like an order, and the more he said it, the thinner his voice sounded. I set the bag down on the step and tried to laugh it off. "Listen, I can't company policy." It felt absurd to argue policy in the cold with a stranger who smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and antiseptic. He didn't blink. Instead, he opened the door wider, and the porch swallowed him. For a heartbeat, I saw movement behind him, a dim shape like a person passing the far window, more than one shadow sliding across the draped sofa. My skin tightened. I told myself to leave the bag on the step and go. That's what any decent person would do. But when I turned a second time, his face had gone rigid. Not right eyes too blank, smile too slow. Something in his voice shifted from insistence to command. "Come inside," he said. "You're not listening." That phrase, simple, stupid, cut through me like a hand across glass. Without thinking, I grabbed the bag, turned, and sprinted. My boots skidded on ice, the snow spitting up behind me like a living thing. The van was there and the lock clicked under my fingers with an exaggerated calm. I would have left if not for the sound behind me, footsteps running the length of the drive, heavy, like someone who'd been standing a long time and suddenly wanted a thing they'd been waiting for. I floored it out of there, fishtailing down the lane until the pines blurred and the world narrowed to taillights and my breath fogging the windshield. In the cold light of morning, I called the restaurant, breathless, and my boss gave me a look like I was playing a joke. "Old houses," he said. "People in the woods are weird." He told me not to worry. He said the address appeared on the app as valid and that sometimes people left odd instructions. I started to explain about the figure, the flashlight, the voices, the way the interior looked like a set. He shrugged and shifted the subject. I want to say he believed me less than I believed myself. I checked the address later because curiosity sits loud beside fear when your hands are still shaking. County records said the house had been vacant for over a year. Utilities cut. Last sale months before my delivery. Nobody lived there. That made the whole thing worse. Why was a young man at the door of an empty house telling me to come in? For a few nights after, I couldn't sleep. The van's heater sounded like someone talking in the room above me. I saw that flashlight beam when the snow fell. When a friend at the kitchen told me about a rumored squatters' camp, I felt relief that was almost foolish. Maybe that's all it was. Some kids with nowhere warm to be and a habit of opening an old house for shelter. That explanation fit easily into the part of my head that wanted the world to be fair, to be straightforward. But there were details that nagged, the way the man repeated his line, "You're not listening," like a phrase someone repeated to themselves before they could act, the way the shapes inside moved with a slick-down purpose, and the way my boss closed down the topic like he was folding a map closed over a place he didn't want drivers to see. I quit that part-time run a week later. Saying no had cost me tips and a little extra cash, but it felt necessary the way stepping away from a cliff felt necessary if you wanted to live. Walking out of the kitchen, the owner gave me a look like he might change his mind and call me back. He didn't. My sister's treatments kept happening without regard for my choices. Bills still needed paying, and I took other runs, safer ones with busy strip malls and lights that stayed on all night. But the memory of that porch stayed in the back of my head like a bruised dull, impossible to ignore. The flashlight beam, the command, the furniture under sheets. Each image returned when the storm hit the coast and the roads went quiet. Sometimes people in the yard would tell stories about houses set up like traps, baited lights, a voice at the door, the desperate kindness of a delivery driver walking inside where no one should be. They spoke in low tones over coffee, glancing at the windows as if expecting something to appear there. The stories were warnings dressed as conversation, how easily a routine can be weaponized when the night is quiet and someone's watching. I don't know what happened behind that closed door. Maybe it was squatters, maybe criminals, maybe something worse that wields a human voice to get what it wants. What I know for sure is the way the sentence, "You're not listening," has lodged itself into my chest. Some phrases have teeth. They stay with you and come out sharp when you talk in the dark. The road asks things of you, often kindness, and sometimes people will use kindness to make you the thing they want. Being responsible doesn't mean being reckless. There are times to help and times to drive away. When the light cuts your face and a voice sounds flat, it's okay to choose safety. Your sister's next treatment is not worth the risk of being the person who didn't listen. That night taught me to be responsible for more than other people's expectations. It taught me to be responsible for my own life.